Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Derrick Terry. I'm the host of I'm Not Complaining, I'm Just Saying, where if you're going to complain, you better bring some solutions to the table. Today, we have a very important show. And before we bring on our special guest, I do this segment that I call, So What the Hell is Derrick Complaining About Now? And then we bring in the guests to kind of address and tackle some of those issues. So just like any show, this is not your CNN type or whatever, but what it is a show that is designed to bring about some solutions, and hopefully you can take something from it. So let me start out with my segment. So what the hell is Derrick complaining about now? In mid-June, Charles County had a triple shooting with one fatality. The alleged black gunman was caught within hours with a handgun and admitted to the shooting. Facing a suspected gunman, the deputies fired a total of, and wait for it, 0 shots at this black suspect. I want you to think about that for a second. I live in Charles County in the current year of 2020. And for those that have lived here all their life, do you think the outcome would have been different under a current administration? I really don't know. But what I will tell you is that I understand communities are dealing with police brutality, harassment, senseless killings of unarmed black men. But is this really an issue in Charles County? I could possibly see the brutality and harassment, but without body camera, which our sheriff has repeatedly asked county elected officials for since coming into office in 2014, it is speculative to say we have a problem. That's just my opinion. Now, my issue specifically with my black folks or my black people is they are trying their damnness to diminish the efforts of our first black or African-American Charles County sheriff, yet refuse to have a heart-to-heart conversation about his requests and initiatives. Most of his simple requests are out of his control and must be approved and or funded by the Charles County Board of Commissioners via the taxpayers. Our sheriff should not have to literally beg to get a line item for body cams for all his deputies so he can ensure full transparency and accountability. Yet we have some elected officials and some community activists pitting the blame on the sheriff and wanting drastic law enforcement reform. I've had several candid conversations with our sheriff, and I can tell you with the utmost truthfulness that he is not against an oversight committee, not against body cams, and not against holding his deputies accountable for misconduct. Our sheriff has put together a comprehensive plan for enhancing policing strategies and strengthening community relations, such as the request for Charles County Board of Commissioners to immediately allocate $1.5 million of funding to initiate the sheriff's body-worn camera program, request additional support and funding by the board, from the Board of Commissioners to continue to enhance the sheriff's de-escalation, conflict resolution, and the use of force training, ensure the sheriff office continues prohibiting neck restraints and head strikes during normal arrest incidents, complete a comprehensive internal review of evaluation of all use of force policies, request the Board of Commissioners and the state delegation, which includes our special guests, to immediately appoint members to the vacant positions of the existing Board of Public Safety to provide review and oversight of the Charles County Sheriff's Office, State's Attorney Office, and courts in accordance with County Code 125. Also to establish a youth advisory council for police and community relations comprised of youth from our communities, as well as request the Board of Commissioners to allocate necessary funding to enhance pretrial services and supervision for arrested persons in the community. And then finally, conduct a Southern Maryland Law Enforcement Summit in the partnership with Calvert County Sheriff Office and St. Mary's Sheriff's Office to discuss improving law enforcement best practices. But he needs our support, not criticism and the constant crab in the barrel mentality. So that is what the hell Derrick is complaining about. So with that said, I want to invite our special guest. I'm glad our special guest is on here. He is a former prosecutor and a public defender, as well as our Maryland State Delegate for Charles County District 28, C.T. Wilson. So welcome, C.T., and thank you for being on the first week of I'm Not Complaining, I'm Just Saying.
It was my pleasure, Derrick. Thanks for having me.
So, want to kind of get down to the nitty gritty, but before we get into that, why did you become a lawyer, and what area of law do you practice?
The reason I became a lawyer is, like all through my childhood, foster care, was always a lawyer there, kind of standing there speaking on my behalf for the judge. And so I kind of saw that power. And as I got older and more run-ins with the law that I thought were unfair, being suspended unduly in high school, I realized that I needed to be able to protect myself. And, no matter how much training physically I have or how good I can fight, you still can't beat the system until you at least learn about it. So that's why I chose to become a lawyer, because I wanted to know how to defend myself, protect myself, and be my own best advocate. So that's why I became a lawyer. I was a chief homicide prosecutor for about 8 years. I was the division chief of community prosecution, like large-scale felonies and homicides, and then switched over and have been a defense attorney since 2012. And that's what I do. I do mostly criminal work. I do personal injury and, a little malpractice. But I'm a trial attorney. I love being in court, so that's what I do, try cases.
Okay, so you definitely bring in a wealth of experience, because you're really covering three areas: as a prosecutor, as a public defender, and as a practicing attorney. So you're able to see law enforcement, which we're going to get into, really law enforcement as well as citizen rights from all three areas. So the title of this show is called "When We Still Comply, We Still Die." When you hear that, what comes to your mind?
Well, from personal experiences, it's just the fact that even when you're doing the right thing, bad things can happen. And so it's the tragedy that I wrote an article about, is that, because of the current police forcing techniques, a lot of African-American males like you and me, we're still seen as threats. And because of that, even when we keep our hands, or we tell them, hey, I'm reaching for my gun, my gun license, or hey, I'm just going to get my registration, which is doing what you're told to do during a traffic stop, that could end up with you losing your life. And that's what it is, because there's this innate fear from the police force that you and I, African Americans, regardless of our state in life, regardless of our age, regardless of our job, at the end of the day, we're still considered a threat, unjustifiably, but in their minds justifiably so. So I understand why the fact that, just telling kids, do as you're told, do everything you're supposed to do, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to come out on the right side. So that's pretty much what I believe.
Yeah, and one of the things, and like I said, I know we touched on it earlier, even with myself, I faced a situation where I thought I was going to die. And all I did, I'm thinking I'm getting pulled over speeding. I got supposedly pulled over because I had tinted windows as I crossed the border of Georgia. And I guess he suspected that I was running drugs or whatever. And I had a little mouth on me. But I didn't think it was justified to put a gun to my mouth. So,
right.
And for me, every time I get stopped, I have that constant where anxiety starts to kick in, the heart starts to pump, because you're thinking, what did I do? What did I do? So I can definitely understand that. So question, in your line of work, what do you find to be the greatest obstacle when you're trying to defend your clients?
Well, bad choices, number one. A lot of times my clients are in a bad situation. They've made horrible decisions in their lives, which has led them to a situation where they need a criminal defense attorney. But also I'll say bad choices because a lot of times I get cases almost secondhand because the attorney that they had, wasn't doing what they want. So a lot of people, or I get, people trying to get me to help them with an appeal because the attorney that they actually paid for talked them into pleading something that they were not guilty of. And I get this a lot when I get clients who are on probation, they pick up a second charge and, and now they're terrified because their first attorney told them, oh, just take the plea. It's a felony, but you don't have to go to jail. And the problem is they plead into things they did not do. They plead guilty. And, even if you're found guilty in the court of law, you can always appeal that guilty finding. You can't appeal a guilty plea. So you give away all your rights. And so that's what I tell people. Whatever you do, man, don't go down on your knees. If you didn't do it, especially fight the good fight. Can't guarantee an outcome, guarantee one hell of a trial, but you have all of your appellate rights preserved if you fight the good fight. If you give up and for what you consider a good plea deal, then that's all gone. So that's one of the biggest obstacles I run into.
Is I think because one of the things that kind of resonates with me is, of course, you have people who make bad choices, and justifiable should get arrested if they make those bad choices, and then you have the legal fight, whether or not they're guilty, not guilty, probation, or whatever it may happen. But then you have citizens who make all the right choices, and then they get pulled over by a police officer. What are some things that you would recommend? And what I mean by right choice, I mean they know they didn't break the law, no drugs, anything. They're literally getting pulled over, and it could be racial profiling. It could be a minor traffic infraction, but whatever it may be. What are some key things that you recommend, and specifically when we're talking about Black people, because whether people want to admit it or not, that is what the state of current affairs is what we're dealing with right now. What are some things that you would suggest? Maybe it can be 4 or 5, whatever it may be, that they should do as soon as they get pulled over by a police officer.
Well, here's a few things. Obviously, safely, if you can. One thing people seem to always forget in times of crisis. Well, our generation, I think the younger generation gets it, but you have a cell phone. Even if you're not recording, even if you can't click to record audio or video, you can still click it to record to at least get a recording of the conversation. Because a lot of times, as you probably know, the cops aren't carrying a dash cam. So their dash cam is off, or they don't have a body cam. But this allows you to memorialize that conversation. And if you can do it without drawing attention, like I said, I don't need you to reach back like you're looking for something, but turn your phone on, record whenever. It's even the most simple of traffic stop, because most likely it's going to go okay.
What happens when they have that phone out and they say to record? Because I've seen a lot of stuff on social media. I'm recording. You turn that phone off, or even with the phone, the police still don't care. So what do you say?
But again, remember, I'm not saying tell the police recording. I'm saying click the button and say record. Don't try and get an aha moment. Oh man, I'm recording you. Watch what you say. Because basically, you're in the streets, and in the streets, you're not going to be able to beat a cop in the streets. You can beat him in court, but you're not going to win in the streets. You're not going to win on the side of the road. You could lose very badly by exacerbating a bad situation or a tense situation, or being even more threatening. And I know we get tired of being told, man, just keep your hands at 10 and 2, don't move. But honestly, I'm not going to sit here and say fight the power, because people that listen, that's their life that's at stake. I know when I'm pulled over, my heart drops same as yours. I get nervous and I start thinking, damn, they can't possibly know about that. I start running through my day of where I've been and what I've done. And I will say one other thing for individuals, just as pay attention to who you're in the car with. Because if you're in the car with 3 people, if there are 3 Black males in the car with 1 gun, guess how many people can get arrested for that gun? All 3 of them. And also, please pay attention when you're speaking with police officers. Of course, whether they're respectful to you or not, remember, can't nobody disrespect you but you. So no matter how lack of respect, just answer their brief questions. But don't ever forget your Fifth Amendment rights. I will always say this. When an officer is asking you a question, he is not trying to get to the bottom of what happened. 9 times out of 10, he's already made up his mind. So even if you say, well, I wasn't doing anything, but I was there, you've given the state and that officer half of their case, because you said you were there. There's no need to do that. You have the right against self-incrimination in this country. You do not have to say anything. You can ask for a lawyer, and you can let it be that. It's very important that people understand their rights. And this is, both of us talk. We're not anti-cop. I'm for law and order. I want safety in my community, but I don't want to see people say the wrong things or think that basically they're helping out the situation. If I talk long enough, I'll be let go. You need to understand at some point the decision's been made well before you started talking.
Yeah, and I think the things that I've observed, and you may observe, is even when you unfortunately or fortunately, depending on the situation, you happen to see what we consider to be unlawful arrests or detain, that a lot of the individuals, particularly African Americans, we don't know our rights, and there's a situation, and I would put it up, but I'm afraid that it may not show, where there was an individual. I forgot what school he went to. It was a college student who basically had a brand new car. And there was a lady who called the cops and said that, I believe this car was carjacked. So to make a long story short, they stopped him. But before they stopped him, he called the police department because he saw that the police was behind him. And as the police were telling him, they pulled him over. He got out, he complied, he put his arms up and got bum rushed by like 5 or 6 cops. I mean, just beat down.
Yeah.
And he did everything right. So
Mhm.
I think what happens, and I understand where you're coming from, the frustration that comes out of people is we do everything right and we still may die, which is, and unfortunately, some people have died by literally complying.
Sure.
So as we move on, when we look at like your professional experience, I do understand there are cases where police have to use deadly force.
Sure.
What are some cases? I wouldn't necessarily say cases, but what are some examples where police force, unfortunately, would have to be used?
Well, and that's a good question, Derrick. And I was going to say, let's be honest. The two that come to mind to everybody are protection of their own life and the protection of others. If you see somebody with a gun pointed at somebody else's head, the cop does not have to wait to find out if the gun's loaded, nor if you're that person who's at the receiving end of that bad person's gun, do you want them to? So when you need to protect somebody else's life, or the cop feels that they need to protect their own. But therein lies the question, not the protection of others. I think everybody understands, no one would dispute that. It's the protection of their own life that becomes very foggy. So in the instance we saw in Atlanta, where that police officer basically, his taser was taken from him, and all he had left was his pistol. Now, a taser will not kill you, and we've argued this time and time again. It can incapacitate you. So that officer chose to discharge his firearm at basically an unarmed individual who had a taser, which is not considered a deadly weapon, when there was another officer for backup. So in cases like that, it is not correct to use deadly force, because again, you don't use deadly force against non-deadly force. But police officers are trained differently. This is what we need to get to the bottom of, as me as a legislator, is they're trained that if they take your pepper spray, your baton, or your taser, that you can use deadly force, which is patently offensive. It's illogical, but that's the problem we have right now with that training, is they're trained that, if you disarm any of my tools, then they have to use deadly force. And that's actually, I don't believe anybody in this community would agree that that's the proper way to address those type of issues.
And I think the other thing, and I don't have the numbers on it, I'm just based on everything that I've seen, is unfortunately is blacks get killed at a much higher rate amongst cops for carrying a weapon, for maybe even brandishing the weapon. And either way, it doesn't make it justified, but it seems where I think you had someone, I think it was a white guy somewhere, where he murdered 4 or 5 people, and they were feeding him, giving him water, making sure he
took
was
him to Burger King. No, that's a school shooting. And my daughter asked me about that because, I talked to my children, we were listening, because one of the things police will tell you, what's the heat of the moment. And in situations like that, when there's this air of violence and this violence of action, the police officers are just human. And they are like everybody else. And then at the heat of the moment, things happen. And my daughter asked, well, why is it when he has shot and killed 18 students in a school, do you still walk him out, surround him with your vests on, and take him to Burger King?
But do you
and
think
she asked
they
that
would?
question.
But do you think they would have did that? And I think
No, that's the point. No, of course not.
With us, I'm saying with the likelihood of us getting shot for doing the same thing is much higher. And I think what happens is, and I'm not saying it's all cops, but I tell you the truth, I've seen black cops treat blacks just the same as white cops when it comes to the violent offender. And I'm not saying it's what's justified. I guess what some people have the argument is if you have someone who shot someone, are you going to let them just put the gun down, or are you going to shoot them? And I think in most cases, you see a lot of blacks getting shot, and then you question, okay, why didn't this white guy get shot when he did the same exact thing? And it may be training, so it may be a cultural or racial thing. I don't know. I can't get into the mind of a cop, but I know they have to make a decision like that.
Well, I'll say this is, that's why when I try to address this, I don't discuss racism when it comes to police brutality, because while racism is definitely intertwined in police brutality, African-American cops beat and kill African-American victims as well. So that's where the whole race, because people always ask me about my solutions. Well, they don't really address race. I don't know how to judge a man's heart, and I don't know how to legislate a man's soul. I can set up a structure much like the military, who has a structure. There's racism in the military, but the structure is set up in such a way that, to the best of their efforts, it doesn't destroy the structure. So racism is there. It does have an impact, but it is not as overarching. And that's why I'm trying to set up a new style of policing, because I believe that our structure allows racism and personal animosity to actually intervene and disrupt the actual system we have.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. We talk about, like I said, structure and coming up with different ways to really address. And I wouldn't necessarily say it's a Charles County problem, but I believe in being proactive. I believe you believe in being proactive, but it's something in which the state of Maryland could adopt depending on what we do. So you and I both served in the military, and military training is a little bit different from the civilian training. And one of the things that I observe, especially with military, police, and the Army, they have to do about a 20-week training. So they have to do the basic together. They also have to do their AIT. And for those who don't know, AIT, Advanced Individual Training, together within 20 weeks. But there are several phases of that of training that they have to do. One of the things that for this on the civilian side, and before we actually go into some of your initiatives or some of the things that you would like to see, is on top of all that, I feel that every police officer should do a quote unquote internship in at least 3 or 4 jurisdictions that are totally outside of there. So let's say, for instance, you're a cop in Washington County or Frederick. You should go to Baltimore City for a week, do that training so you can learn what those cops go through, but you also can somewhat be exposed to a different demographic and socioeconomic, because I think it makes for a more well-rounded cop, but you also get the opportunity to learn the strategies of de-escalation. So, what is some of the, I guess, some of the key issues as a delegate or even as with private practice that you would want to deal with in terms of law enforcement reform?
All right. Well, and before I want to just briefly, talk about the whole policing in this country. It is an artificial construct that we have in this country, which is basically a social contract between all of us and police officers, that they have authority and we will comply. It is an agreement. If you think about it from that perspective, there is nothing anywhere, we're not forced to agree. There's nothing in our DNA that requires that we submit to an individual because he has a badge or a gun. But we've made that choice as a society in order to have lawful, discourse, in order to, have safe neighborhoods, that we have complied because we will basically comply with their, and observe the authority. The problem that we're facing now is, much like when you find out your teacher doesn't really know math, they lose their authority. And they lose it when you see people do things the wrong way repeatedly. Then you stop saying, well, why do I need to listen to you? That's where we are at now. We are at this turning/breaking point of citizenry going, no, you don't have authority over me. And as you know, once that actually occurs, then we are in trouble as a nation, because that's when anarchy ensues. So again, it's very important that we basically change the actual conversation, from a conversation to actually doing something, because we're not in a really good place right now. And cops will tell you, that they don't feel safe. Citizens will tell you that they don't feel safe. So right now, nobody feels safe. But as I always say, it's always the people in power that can create the safety. The police have the power to create the safety in the way they change their structure, their standards, and their practices. And some of the things, as I'm sure you're aware of, is, training. I'll say this, if you are an overweight or you're out of shape, and I kind of take care of myself. If I don't want to be arrested, all you have as an out of shape police officer is your gun to rely on. So that's all you can do. And we saw a very good example of that with these police officers. And granted, they did everything right in Atlanta as far as the arrest. It was 40 minutes long. But when that situation turned hostile, both of them were unable to physically take down one individual. Because
I saw one dude, and he was a big dude. I wouldn't say big as fit, but just big as in big. And his weapon was the baton. That's what he used.
Sure. because he doesn't know what an arm bar is. He doesn't know what arm locks are. And it's like when we saw the guy up in Baltimore City, Big Brother, and this larger black woman was punching a white shirted cop, his captain. He came up from behind, and his reaction was a haymaker from behind, punching a woman in the back of the head, knocked her out. Yeah. That's poor training. Yeah. If the only two tools you have at your disposal, you're there to protect and serve, and the only thing your immediate thought, and Derrick, you get this, like as we get older, yeah, that's probably what I do now if I got in a fight. But when I was younger, when I was a soldier, I had all kind of tools at my disposal to basically incapacitate an assailant. So I say all that to say that there needs to be more consistent training. These are things, and I don't want to, beat this dead horse, but the fact is they're not trained in hand-to-hand combat. They're not trained in close quarters combat, and they're not even trained well with the weapon. Many officers just go to the range once a year. And I know nobody wants to hear that, but let's be honest, they have weapons for a reason. You know this. If they're trained and you're confident in your abilities, you're less likely to need to use them. And we've seen it go to a bar. The baddest dude in there is the one not talking. That's the one. The guy who doesn't need to do it that crosses his arms when you're talking in his face, that's the guy you need to be afraid of. Look at our Secret Service. You don't see them, getting angry, losing their mind. No, because they're trained, they're consistently trained, and they're competent, and they're confident. And once they're confident, they're not scared anymore. They don't need to pull their gun, and they sure don't need to have a shake when they do.
Yeah, and see, so I kind of look at it, for me, being a former educator now, but I still came in with military training, where 99.9% of the time, students that approach me didn't approach me with a deadly weapon. They would approach me ready to fight, but because I was trained, I wouldn't say arm-to-arm combat, but really defensive moves, I was able to put the student in a situation where they weren't hurt, but they were restrained until either school, I started teaching Baltimore City, so we had school police at the time, till school police showed up. But even with one SRO or school resource officer, they're not going to be able to get there in time. They can't cover the entire school. So when you bring up a valid point when you talk about training, and I don't think a lot, and I really look at civilians. There are things that we can do from a military standpoint, because we understand there's rules of engagement. And you have to be able, even at the federal, state, or local level, to exercise a level of restraint, especially when you're dealing with someone who doesn't have a weapon. And you had mentioned something you had wrote, and it was 3 things that I wanted to touch on when we talk about what are some things that we can do to bring about change when we talk about enhancing the policing strategies as well as citizens' rights. You had mentioned something about malpractice. Can you explain what you meant? Well, I know what you mean, but can you explain to us?
Basically, at this point, we need to create a structure that we pay out a lot. Every county pays out. And when I say we pay, that means the citizens pay. So when somebody wins a police brutality case in your jurisdiction, it's settled out, you, the citizen, pays. The police, it doesn't come out of their budget. The FOP doesn't come out of their budget. It doesn't even come out of that police officer's pocket. But as a lawyer, I've got malpractice insurance, because when I mess up, that's what they go after. When a CPA messes up, they have malpractice. Realtors have coverage for this. There are many other professions that actually have some sort of malpractice coverage to ensure that basically if they mess up, then at some point they're going to pay, and their rates are going to go up. And if they can't be covered, then they can't operate in that profession. That's something that we need to take over with our law enforcement. At some point, they need to have be financially vested in what goes on in their jobs, not just where the county pays out a settlement. It's one thing when they're trained incorrectly. It's another entirely different thing when they just do things, they commit torts outside of the scope of their job and their training.
Yeah, so basically, because you have the naysayers who say, well, I think that's a stupid idea, but to me, it's stupid for me as a taxpayer to pay for you messing up. You messed up, but yet you want me to pay for it. And I don't know if some people don't understand the term malpractice, or I really don't know. But what I will say, look at it like this: if you go and get something done at the doctor, and you're going there to get operated, say, I don't know, on your left finger, and they have to take off your left finger and end up taking off your right toe. Then who do you sue? Of course, you sue the doctor. You don't, you can sue the hospital, but if no, I can't see any hospital saying, you know what, we'll go ahead and take you and doctor, and you can make a couple mistakes. They'll probably get fired because, or get whatever you call it, get the medical license taken away, one of the two, because that is an error that you just can't explain. So it's the same thing if you have a cop shooting an unarmed citizen. You can't explain that. Well, I thought he had a gun. Well, guess what? Someone's dead.
Exactly. And the thing is, for me, it's really bringing them into that fold of being a professional police officer, not like, oh, wasn't my fault. Well, you know what? Things happen. No, things happen and they happen to us and we're responsible for them. And also that way we don't have to deal with the delays that we're dealing with now of how long it takes someone who commits an unlawful act and has a badge and gun to be terminated. It comes a matter of, well, you can't be insured anymore, so this has nothing to do. We're not waiting for the disciplinary procedures. We're going to go about this because you can't be covered. So that's one of the other things that it, again, puts them in their mind that if I want to keep doing this job, that I need to be doing it well. Otherwise, I can't. Because remember, there's negligence, i.e. accidents that happen in the course of your duties, but that's not our issue. It's the gross misconduct. Those are where these individuals are not protected. They don't need to protect. The qualified immunity needs to be, we need to lower that threshold a little bit, and we need to make sure that they have adequate coverage, because the county should not have to keep paying. For the naysayers out there, I don't even understand. I don't understand. I've heard one or two people that have a problem with it, but I don't think they grasp actually what malpractice insurance is, because I've never heard any professional, even many cops, agree with this premise that there's nothing wrong with being covered for your own actions. So again, yeah, I believe that this is, I think it's a strong principle. I think it's something that's untried, and there's never going to be a better time in American history to change the dynamic in the way that we operate as policing in this country.
Okay. And there's one other point I want to touch on. And actually, I would say this is a great article. If you get an opportunity, Delegate C.T. Wilson wrote an article on MarylandMatters.org, police reforms Maryland needs. And one of the, there's a lot of things that are in here, but one of the things that stood out that I agreed with, but then I also had, well, let me ask you this. So I'm just going to read it to everyone real quick. It says, Black communities want law and order just as much as any other community. We have families. We own houses. We run our businesses. We don't hate police. We just want them to see us as citizens worthy of being protected and served. Put another way, we deserve the righteous, equitable, and moral protections that our laws offer. I agree with that, but this is the question I have. And someone who's taught in Baltimore City, to some degree, I can empathize with these students. What do you say to that person who saw their father get shot for mistaken identity, saw their mom get shot because she was at the wrong place at the wrong time, and none of those cops went to jail? And so now they grow up hating cops. What do you say to that person?
I say, well, you know what? Even Black folks deserve justice. And I say that kind of tongue in cheek because there's this confusion that somehow even a person like that is going to end up not having a family. He's going to have children, or she is going to have children. He's going to have, or she's going to have a wife or a husband. They're going to have a home, a place that they want to live. And at that point in time, if somebody violates the sanctity of their home or their family, they're going to want justice too, regardless of what they went through. And I'm not saying they're going to trust police at all. It's hard for me sometimes. And when I was young, I didn't have anything to do with police. But when I had children, and when I bought a home, and when I became a member of my community, and I felt vested in my community, it became important to protect my community, not from just cops, but from bad guys, from people that would prey upon my community, my people, and my family. So I will always say that there's no perfect system, and we're trying to find one. And to all the naysayers out there, I love the fact that I hear people, they say, no, I ain't heard a good but yet. I haven't heard a better comment yet. I haven't heard anything but the no. Because at the end of the day, we deserve justice. And most folks I know that have had bad interactions with the police still say, oh no, we want to be policed, but we want to be policed properly. And for those that just don't want policed in anarchy, I don't know what to say to you. I feel you, understand, but that's just not the way our country is going to thrive. That's not the way our culture and our Black people are going to thrive under anarchy.
Well,
because safety
unless
is
unless
everyone's important.
unless they travel to probably some places, may not have been the same places, but we've been in some places overseas where
Yes, sir.
you have corrupt police forces and things of that nature, and I always tell people everything gets fake until it gets real. So I think that's just a lot of social media BS, and I don't really pay that any attention. But what I will say, and I definitely agree with you, is that with comprehensive community input, when we talk about these reforms, I think at the end of the day, that's really what people want. I don't think that people hate the police like that. When I look at Charles County, and I'm only speaking from my personal opinion, based on the population, the demographics, this is probably one of the better law enforcements in the entire state. Is it perfect? No. But there are some things that are out of our sheriff's control when it comes to funding, when it comes to resources. And somewhere down the line, we need to develop a matrix like they have for school teachers, where if your population increases, then thus you should get an increase in your police force. And right now, we're just not there. So I definitely thank you for being on the show. And like I said, you are a practicing attorney. So if someone wants, huh?
I just want to say this real quick because you did
Okay.
mention Charles County. And I know we have things to do on the state level. And I think if you read the article, you'll see the things I'm trying to do. But as a county, there are things our citizens can do right now. And the things that we need to really focus on are a citizen review board with subpoena power that has true oversight in police misconduct and police brutality. We also need to make sure, and this is something we can do right now, we need to make sure that there are citizens appointed to the hiring committees. So these are our cops. There should be an equal number of citizens as there are police officers in the rank and file, because we need to make sure that these are our cops, that they have the standards we want, not the standards they want, because that's a problem right now. The problem is we're not a part of the hiring process. We only hear, we find out about them when basically something bad happens or we need them. But we should be a part of that hiring process, because remember, that's our tax dollars. We need to be there. And lastly, without a doubt, this is the one thing that's going to change the very nature of the way policing is done: body cameras. Don't tell me about cost anymore. Now is the time. Body cameras, body cameras. We need to make sure every officer, while they're on duty, and you might not like it. I get you. I don't know how I'd feel about wanting to have a camera on me at all times. But I'll say this, I also don't have the power to take somebody's life and get away with it. I also don't have a power to where my word is taken over anybody else's. So at this day and age, with the technology we have, it is inexcusable that there's an arrest and there's no recording of it. It needs to be memorialized. We need body cameras yesterday, because that way you'll and I'll have faith in them too. We don't have to take an officer's word. Technology will speak for itself.
Well, I don't know if I get the sheriff on here anytime soon, but if I do, I know I've had a lot of candid conversations with him in reference to body cams. And when that is requested in the budget, it's not fully funded. So, and I don't believe that any government entity should not have to go back to their board of commissioners to beg for something that is needed. And I don't know all the details of it, but I know since 2014, those cameras have been requested. And I didn't look at the previous sheriff and his budget, but I think the percent of increase has been significantly decreased since he's been in office. I don't know why. That's a topic for another day. But I do know, at least from the conversation I've had with Sheriff, he wants the body cams. He wants them, so one, being transparent and be held accountable. So I'm hoping that those discussions are happening between him and the Board of Commissioners, so they can come up with a mutual agreement or understanding that you can't sit here and say that, yes, we want our police department to have body cams, but yet you're not giving them the funding for it. And you shouldn't, I'm saying find it. Find the funding. You can find it for everything else.
Well, remember, that's a two-way street, though, because that also, I'll take a step back. But when you're the commander and when you're in charge of a mission, they don't ask you how much you need for the mission. They tell you to get the mission done with what you have. In a state of emergency, when there is no money, when we have a COVID outbreak, when we are spending money, we are hemorrhaging money as a county, as a state, and as a nation, it is sometimes you have to step back within your own budget and make it so. So I agree.
But
It
the thing
needs to be
about it,
funded. No, I'm not going to argue funding.
yeah.
It needs to be funded, but we can't wait until the next funding cycle to start.
But the thing about it, if it's not part of his line item, he has to go back to the commissioners to have that. He can't get the it has to be, you shouldn't have to constantly go back to speak with commissioners to move money within your own budget. The school board doesn't do it. They can do what they want.
Well, if we got a police force, that might not be that big of an issue either. Because
yeah, we're talking about a different form of government, but I definitely understand that.
Yeah, because I don't want to keep having, my worry is we're always going to have a reason why things are too expensive and they can't be done. There are certain things that have to be done regardless of expense. We all need to tighten our belts, and these things need to happen. Yeah. This isn't something we can drag on for the next 3 years like we've done with the Citizen Review Board. They just need to happen.
Okay.
We are at a tilting point in this country.
All right. Well, look, you heard it from Delegate C.T. Wilson that, look, these things need to happen. And look, community, you need to make it happen. I'm saying if you put pressure on your elected officials, you put pressure on whoever you need to. But guess what? Going on social media and chit-chatting about it, no. You email them. Believe me,
correct.
I'm probably a thorn in their ass when I want to get something. And you got to do what you got to do. But once again, I thank you for being on the show, my friend. It's the first week. And I hope everyone got something out of this. At least one thing you got out of this. You learned something. And we just going to keep moving. So, I wish you the best of luck and everything. Please stay safe. Tell the family I said hello.
Oh, and,
how can they reach you if they're looking for an attorney or if they want to reach you through your office?
Well, I'll say this. As an African-American attorney, one thing I know is ethics, and I know that I might not be able to get away with everything other people can. So I'm not here to solicit anybody's. I don't need you don't need to contact me as an attorney. If you have, as a delegate, if you have something you need, it's ct.wilson@house.state.md.us. ct.wilson@house.state.md.us. I'm not here to solicit clients. That's not why I'm here. I'm here acting as a delegate. I know some folks can get away with it. I learned a long time ago, just because all the people can get away with it, that doesn't mean we can. So no, this is as a delegate reaching out to you.
And I definitely appreciate your honesty in that, because I didn't know. So, and guess what? He educated me. So, when I look at that, that's where you look at the trust in your elected officials. Ethics.
Very important.
Okay. But like I said, once again, I definitely appreciate it. And, we'll be in touch.
Yes, sir.
Blessings to everyone.
Bless. Tell the family I said, hey.
All right.